My screen. I presume everyone can see my screen at this, hopefully.
Yeah, Mary, yeah.
That's brilliant. Thank you. I'll start off by a very quick introduction. My name is Mary Flynn. I've been a quantity surveyor for an awful long number of years, chartered surveyor for longer than I care to remember. And I have spent a lot of time in private practice, as well as I spent many, many years with the developers, and both here and abroad. And at the moment, for the last 7 years, I'm in the public sector, just to give you where I'm coming from. So I'm coming from the public sector perspective, but I would equally as well come from the private sector as well. So this applies to everyone really, where we're going the information I'm going to go forward with. So today I'm going to talk about the ISO 9650 and the common data environment. Now, we did one, myself and my colleague Gary Comerford did this BIM Bites 2 years ago. And while some of the information is still relevant, a lot has changed. We've moved on. We have since then, we've moved on. And as I said, we now have a BIM mandate. But I'll talk first about the BIM. And basically, everyone knows that I think at this stage there's been a lot of awareness. We no longer speak about BIM level 2. Instead, we speak about information management, to give it its correct title, according to ISO 19650. That is the correct title. BIM has different connotations, but basically what we're dealing with here, we're dealing with information management, which is BIM. And I've given you a definition of what BIM is, basically, but I think at this stage everyone recognizes what it is. But I've also given you a definition of what information management means. And information management is very, very important for the simple reason that the government, when they mandated BIM, which is in July of the 4th of July this year, they mandated BIM over the next 4 years for all BIM projects, right down to less than 1 million. Now, they're not expecting to have models on those, but they are expecting all projects will follow a standardized information management process. So that's really where the information management comes in. Now, it's exciting this year because for the first time we have not only one mandate, but we have 2 mandates, and there are 2 very significant mandates, each in their own right, and they're monumental, but together, the only way I can describe it is seismic. It's the biggest single change in the construction sector over the last probably 100 years, because before this we operated mostly in an analog manner, or we operated in a digital, in a 2D manner, for want of a better word. So when the government mandated the BIM requirements, which will be introduced from 2024, it was brilliant news. They first mooted the idea back in 2017 when they did a statement paper of intent saying they will mandate it, and now they have mandated it. But the government have also mandated the ICMS requirements, and that will start simultaneously as well from 2024. Now, the reason I bring that one up is because we can't have one without the other. They're integrated. They're both digital platforms. They're both about digitalized information, and they're both about getting the best out of information. Now, the government will also have an inclusion for BIM delivery requirements into the scope of services for the consultants. So just to let everyone know, that's what's going to happen. But they will also be publishing, because we're surveyors here. We're either surveyors as public or private sector ones, but they will also be publishing templates for the scope of services, the fee breakdown, the amended conditions of contract, as well as guidance for the CWMF requirements. Now, the reason why the CWMF requirements is very important is because the government is the biggest single client of construction. Whether you include roads, railways, no matter what you have, TII, all of us, we're the single biggest client of construction. So they're mandating the use of ICMS cost reporting for life cycle analysis and life cycle costing from 2024. The carbon bit does not come into it until 2025. But again, they are completely related. So we can't really have one without the other. So what I've done is I've shown you the public sector BIM adoption timeline. Now, since we're all quantity surveyors and we either if we work for the private consultants, the ones in pink are the ones that are relevant to us first. If we're on the contractor side, then the ones in between are relevant to us. But between now and between now and the next 4 years, all will be BIMmed. It'll be BIMmed on an incremental basis. So at the moment, from January 2024, all projects over 100 million will be BIMmed. But that's a non-brainer because all projects over 100 million are being BIMmed. It's like, but it's given a start. But For any consultant quantity surveyors out there, the biggest single change they will notice is in year 2, where all contracts over 20 million, which is the vast majority of contracts, they lie in between 20 and 100 million, most of them do, then it kicks into play. But it kicks into play if you're on the design team for the first 6 months and if you're on the contractor team for the second 6 months. So they're doing it on an incremental basis. So I have mentioned the ICMS, and I can't not mention it, basically, because it's a cost reporting standard which the government is introducing. And if you look at the slides, it affects the capital expenditure, the operational expenditure, and the embodied carbon. And it's based on the ISO 19650 standards. It's based also on the ICMS standards, which is international best practice. It takes account of BIM, and it is supported by the government, professional bodies, industry, and software. So this is supported by the OGP, but it is also supported by the SCSI. SCSI were one of the founder members as part of this coalition on the ICMS. So they are mandated to do ICMS as well. But they decided to wait till we could do it in line with the construction, the government, because then it'll be rolled out under the capital works management frameworks for everybody. So we'll all be operating on the same basis. And I know there's a lot of QSs out there who operate on, do a lot of private sector work, and they're big guys and they do international work, but they will also be using ICMS as well. So the standards won't differ very, very much. But just to let you know, that's a BIM bite or an ICMS bite in its own right, and there's quite a lot in that. But a lot of work has taken place on it. So we do have the standard, which is the ICMS 3, which is the latest one. And ICMS 3, I'll very briefly talk about this, is the embodied carbon. What we have done now, the SCSI have very kindly done a guide to mapping the national building elements. The national building elements going forward from 2024 will be defunct. They will no longer be applicable in any of the government formal contracts, anything to do with it. But what they've done is the government also have mapped all their cost reporting documents as well. So a lot of their documentation will be released in this month and the next month. But the ICMS have done this, so they've taken all the hard work out of doing it. And the ICMS have also, hot off the press, done an ICMS 3 explained for the Irish jurisdiction. So it's important to note that the key drivers for this is the digitization of the capital works management framework, and it utilizes the data handling capacity of building information modeling. So this is very important going forward. So I've shown you, this is a very nice diagram of the capital works management framework. And the OGP and the government, we're working on this, providing the templates for this, providing all the templates required, all the cost reporting documents required, all the forms, everything, to make sure that the BIM mandate by 2024 is a success, as well as, or sorry, by 2027, as well as the ICMS mandate. So this gives you an indication how the capital works looks at things. Now, the other thing is as well, as you know, climate action is a particularly important issue, and we have to incorporate embodied carbon, life cycle costing. You know, we have to look at all the carbon going forward. So by the utilization of BIM and ICMS, this actually helps us, because they're tools, they're digital tools, and their processes and their standards. They will help us actually enable us to do life cycle costing, enable us to do carbon counting, enable us to do operational carbon. But the other thing you've got to look at is the sustainable goals. And as you know, also, and it's not just a question of carbon counting, it's a question of all resources are becoming an issue. We have less and less staff, we have less and less members. We're productivity needs to be increased, and you know, we're not able to get quantity surveyors like we used to. So now what we have to do is a lot more productivity and a lot more streamlining, but we have the tools to do it. So BIM and again the ICMS both will enable a huge digitization of the goals, the climate goals. So I'm showing the dimensions here, but we've actually moved from the 3D, 4D, 5D, 6D, 7D, 8D, 9D, 10D dimensions, but I haven't put them here. Now, when the UK mandated BIM back in 2016, they did not mandate the 5D element of it. In other words, quantity surveyors were not required to be BIM mandated. And that was a huge drawback with regard to the BIM, the UK BIM mandate. Obviously, they've corrected it since, but we now going forward are looking at not only mandating the 5D, but 6D and 7D. And And we will be mandating obviously the 8D, which is the health and safety, but it'll go on to, you know, infinity. It'll be D infinity basically, because there's so many more dimensions that we can actually streamline and manage. So I've shown you diagrams here, the cost of not using digitalization early on and the wastage of primary and very important data. And once upon a time, to BIM or not to BIM, I like this, was a question. From here on in, to BIM or not to BIM is no longer a question. It's not optional anymore. So we need to get on board. I've also shown you here the BIM wedges. You'd probably be sick looking at BIM wedges, but this BIM wedge goes to a much higher level. We're really at level 3 there at IBIM, or depending on where you look at it, would even be a level 10. But you can see the potential that's right up to level 8. Like there's massive potential. And this all is going to happen exponentially because we will now have the data. We will now have structured, analyzed data. We will be able to do things we could never do before because we never had the data. It was always siloed, but now going forward, this is where we're going to go. So it's never been more exciting to be a quantity surveyor than probably next year. But interestingly enough as well, the other thing I need to mention is RM5. RM5 is coming out next year. Now RM5, of course, will be digitized. It'll include, you know, manufacturing offsite. It'll include a whole lot of different things. And again, another digital tool. So, you know, we'll be so digitalized next year. It'll be amazing, but it'll take us a few years to get the hang of it and to embed it and to have it as business as usual. But at the end of the day, we're at a stage where, as I say, quantity surveyors have never moved so fast, so quickly. But the other thing to mention is there is confusion among surveyors. When, you know, the ICMS originally, when it came out, it was the International Construction Measurement Standards. But actually it is a cost reporting system. It is not a method of measurement. Now, luckily, the ICMS coalition, they corrected that. So it's now called the International Construction Management Standards, because really it's about managing cost reporting, cost information. So just to avoid any confusion between the different types. And as quantity surveyors, we know if we can't measure it, we can't control it. If we can't control it, we can't manage it. If we can't manage it, we can't improve it. So this is right down our alley. But what's mostly down our alley is we're at a stage now where everything is, we're using AR, we're using artificial intelligence, we're using it like we never did it before. There's machine learning. I mean, everybody has heard about AI. It's the hottest topic, I think, in construction at the moment. Not just construction, but AI in just digitalization, generally speaking. But the great thing about BIM is it will enable us to automate standard practices that don't add value, so that we as quantity surveyors can add value very early on. We can do an awful lot of optioneering. We can look at things. We can look at the cost. You know, we can do carbon counting and see it isn't just a question. It's a question of cost benefit analysis. It isn't just a question of cost. It's a question of carbon. There's a lot of things. It's a question of ECG. It's a question of community. It's a question of what benefits. So we need to look at things in a much, much broader plane going forward. Now, to talk about the standards, we have the ISO 19650 standards. These standards are, the first one actually is part 1, they call it. That's the 19650. These replace the PAS 1192 standards. And again, there was 6 PAS 1192 standards. And most of these British standards have been subsumed into the ISO 19650 standards. And the thing about the ISO 19650 standards are, these are the standards we have to use for BIM. But there is one additional requirement. The BIM mandate requires the use of the Irish National Annex. And basically, most people up till now who have been doing BIM would have used the British one and will be much familiar with the British one. But the Irish government will require the use of the Irish National Annex. Again, there'll be a lot of templates and documentation, guidance notes and good practice will come out from the OGP regarding that. So the primary documents are part 1, which is concepts and principles. Part 2, which is the delivery phase of assets. And the concepts, course, and principles are like, what's it all based on? Why are we doing it? The delivery phase then is the construction. The operational phase then, that's the facilities management. That's where you're looking at your life cycle costing, your life cycle analysis. You're looking at your maintenance, planned maintenance. You're looking at digital twins. You're looking at that kind of stuff. Information, then part 4 is information exchange. This is how we exchange information. This is the common data environment. And like everything, we have to have security. So 19655 is a security-minded approach to information management. And it filters right back through all of the information. So ISO 19650 is still in development, but we expect that one fairly soon. So getting back to the information management using BIM can enable dramatic improvements in delivery and performance efficiencies by catalyzing increasingly innovative ways of working across the built environment. Now, this is particularly important because we're looking at MMC, and we're looking, if we follow the UK practice, 30% of the UK are doing MMC and it's a requirement. We'll be doing much the same to get better value houses quicker, faster, and we'll be doing the same. So BIM enables that. BIM enables a huge amount of work that it enables us to be able to for if you're doing manufacturing off-site, we can do it like cheaper, quicker. We can do it to precise measurements. We can do it with a very high quality control. We can do it, there's huge benefits, huge benefits. The thing about the ISO 19650 series is it is an international standard of good practice. It is also an EU standard. So the standard here considers all the information, whether it's a construction program, a record of a meeting, or a geometrical model, or a contract information standard. In other words, the standard considers every bit of information that ever goes into building any kind of infrastructure, whether it's a road or a house or an apartment. Everything that goes into that, it's a single source of information. The important thing to remember is BIM is not a 3D model. In the past, people were of the view that if you had Revit, you were BIMmed. But you may use a model, and in many instances, you will use a model. But if you look at the mandate for the government, like the less than 1 million, or the greater than maybe even 5 to 1 million, it's unlikely there'll be models used in any of those, particularly the less than 1 million. But the information standard still applies. And basically, BIM is a building information management system. It's a process. BIM is not a model. And the one thing about the new BIM mandate is it will create new roles. There's new roles going forward. There'll be a lot of acronyms. There'll be a lot of responsibilities and things that people didn't have before. So you can't say anymore that I want something BIM level 2 because that's meaningless. But you can't also say, well, I'll hand it over to somebody else. You do whatever it is you have to do. Now the client has a set of functions he must complete. Everybody has a set of tasks they must complete. So it is a totally different way of working. It's more like working up front. Before, kind of, we did a design as you build. Now we have to build before we design. We have to design before we build. We design virtually before we build. So this is the idea of where we can streamline things, and the clash detection and all these kind of things come into play. So we can do it much more effectively, efficiently, and cheaply. And the thing about using inappropriate tools. Now, it's very important because common data environment is a big part of the 19650. So if you use a common data environment, again, there's a preconceived ideas out there as what a common data environment is. But not all common data environments will meet the ISO 19650 standards, and they need to. And so I suppose to give a breakdown is there is in the ISO 19650 standard, there's 8 mandatory sub-processes. And each of those sub-processes is divided into a number of activities. There's actually 40 in total, which I'll show you a little further down. Now, the OGP, in collaboration with Built Digital, and everyone I think at this stage will know Built Digital comes under the remit of the construction sector group, and they're completing their 2nd year of their remit, are developing BIM templates and guides, such as the EIR, OIR, AIR, PIR, BIM Execution Plans, and all of this good stuff. You'll soon get used to the acronyms, and it does take quite some time to get used to them. Also because EIR in the past would be called, Employers' Information Requirements. So there's subtle differences between some of them. And these templates we expect to be published from November 2023 onwards. So the OGP and the government have a lot of templates, and they will be producing a lot. So it's early days yet. Now, this is where I was talking about the 8 groups and the 40 different subgroups. And as you can see, the activities are undertaken. Each one leads to the other one. And first, there is the assessment and need. If there's no need for something, then why are we doing it? Before we did things, we never really thought about them. Now we have to think about them. And in the assessment and need, you'll see all the different tasks that have to be done, and you'll see who has to do them. The appointing parties do this, this, and this. And they lead on to other tasks, which leads on to other tasks. And if you look at the legend, you'll see who has to do what, when, where, and how the information process is managed, how the model is managed, and how it is in many ways an iterative model, so for want of a better word. And you'll also see that even at the end of the day, there is a project closeout. Again, you have all these parties and teams, and I put this one down here. It's basically you have in the old BIM, to BIM to level 2, the client was the client and everyone knew who everyone was. But in this case, it's appointed parties, lead appointing parties, so there's a lot of confusion. So you do need to actually take a little bit of time to think about it, because appointing parties can occur everywhere. Lead appointing parties can occur in the various supply chains. So I'm not going to get into this because that is it's a whole area in itself. But this is the terminology we use, and this is how we do it. And if you look at the ISO standards, they actually tell you how to do it. They tell you who everybody is and what processes you must follow. Then the ISO standard, if you can see here, I'm doing an overview now, and this is a quick overview basically in a nutshell. We look at the delivery phase. If you look at the blue circle is, it's the green circle first is how we deliver it. It's what we do. And then we have to look at the operational phase, and then we have to look at the infra management phase, and then we have to look at the asset and project management, and then we have to look at the organizational management. Again, that goes back to the EIR, the OIR, the PIR, the AIR. It goes back to all of these things, and they all relate to this. So I've given you an information I've given you a slide as to what it all means. But if you look on the right-hand side, which is very important, we have to define, why do we need something? We don't just produce something for the sake of it. We now need to be much more discretionary about, or much more concentrate on, why do we need it? If there's not a need, we shouldn't provide it. On what level do we need it? So we look again at things from the business layer, an information layer, a technology layer, and a standards layer. And here you have your OIR, your AIR, your AIM, your PIM. Again, it takes a lot of time to get used to the acronyms, and they are rather confusing. And it's really only in doing the work that you'll eventually become comfortable with it, and you'll eventually get the hang of it. But I recommend people who haven't already done it do some pilot projects, because there's learnings along the way. And eventually you will see, there's a lot of lessons learned, and you'll get really good at it. And eventually it will become business as usual. But just to explain again that the OGP, in collaboration with Build Digital, are developing these BIM templates and guides. So EIR, which used to be information requirements, employer information requirements, now is actually exchange information requirements. The OIR remains the same, it's organizational information requirements, and the AIR, the asset information requirements, remains the same, as does the project information requirements. But this leads to an asset information model and a project information model. And these are important because the asset information model eventually will move across into the facilities management and into managing the asset. Here again, you'll see what is the information management function. And this is some very, very good diagrams which actually explain what each person does and why they do it and how they do it. So again, it's a deep dive into that you'd need to look at. But depending on what your function is, you will need to look at what you have to do and what you're expected to do and what you should do. Sorry, I'll need to go back. I seem to have gone on too fast. I missed one. Maybe I have. Oh, yes. Sorry. The one thing about the information requirements is, depending on what you're doing and where you are, it will depend on the level of information you required, and the level of information required, and what functions you have, and what your roles and responsibilities are. Because going forward, there's like responsibility matrices. There are so many new templates that you need to know and you need to become familiar with. So just a quick rundown on what the common data environment is. The common data environment is again mentioned in the ISO 19650. And what I've done is I've kind of taken examples of what it is and why we have it and why we should have it and why we should do it. So I've taken an example of what is the common data environment. And basically it's a central repository where construction project information is stored and shared. And it's a digital information platform which allows for project team collaboration and improved decision making. And it is a single source of information used to collect, manage, and disseminate documentation. It includes the graphical model, the non-graphical data for the whole team. Now, it's not a static model. A CDE is updated throughout the whole life cycle of the project. It must comply with regulations and standards. In other words, it must comply with the requirements of what a CDE is under 19650. It must also require, it must be secure. There are a number of systems currently operating across the industry, and each of us will be familiar with the different ones. But training is required for administrators and users, because the administrators are the people who must configure the CDE requirements to specific projects. They're the ones who allow access. They're the ones who set up the whole process in the first place. The users then will depend on who they are. They're usually the design team members. They can be the contractors. There can be any number of users. And the users will each have different access levels, maybe security levels. For example, as quantity surveyors, we wouldn't like people to see our bills of quantities or some of our cost information. Whatever is sensitive would remain sensitive, and would only limited people would only have access to it as needed. So I'll show you some samples of common data solutions. And there's a number of them out there, like A-Site, which everyone at this stage will be very familiar with. There's the BIM 360, there's Viewpoint, there's A-Connects, there's Procure. There's a number of new ones on the scene as well, a lot of new ones on the scene. But whatever ones you get, they still have to be configured to the specific project requirements. Now, who should provide or manage the CDE? At the design stage, ideally, the employer should do it. And it depends on whether or not the facility is being held in-house, if it's been sold on. But basically, if it's been held in-house, ideally the employer should hold all of the information, because then it'll go into his asset information register, as organizational information requirements, it'll go into his asset information model. So these are the kind of things that are very important. But generally in the beginning, the employer should do it. And if he can't do it, he should get his lead appointed party to procure it for him, set it up for him. And usually this is handed over at the construction site. It'll be the employer design team led, and the contractor will come on board as well, because the contractor must then develop the design. So why is it important? It is very important. It's an essential part of the ISO 19650. It's the essential part of the collaboration. It's the essential part of the one source of information. And it's an essential part of engineering construction project. Two of the key outcomes of using a CDE is focus on project collaboration, which is really where in the past everything fell down, because we all worked in our little silo environments. And the other is information management. And here now there is transparency. There's an audit trail. We can see who did what, when, where, and how, when something was uploaded, or what the problems was. We can also see how we can see how we looked at things. And it's very important early on, at the early stages, to be able to optioneer, before we really get into detailed design development. It's important to look at climate action. It's important to look at carbon. It's important to look at all of those other requirements that are not just monetary. But using the ICMS and using the BIM model, using BIM, we will be able to produce a bill of carbon, and we'll also be able to produce a bill of quantities, and we'll be able to do them both simultaneously. But there's a lot of work in there, but we have to. This is what ICMS 3 is all about. It's about carbon counting. Now, it also captures a full audit trail of a built asset through a highly secure, unalterable, undeletable, and neutral environment. So it's neutral for everyone, basically, and it is a highly it has an audit trail that it captures everything. But the aim of the common data environment is to improve the creation, sharing, and using of information that underpins the delivery of projects. And the idea of collaboration is to drive improved results and efficiencies, is at the heart of implementing a BIM approach on construction projects. And it is the single source of truth, and you were always working off the latest updated drawings. Now, implementing BIM. There's a lot of things when we look at implementing BIM and we're looking at it that we need to consider. And again, this is strategic. It's a high level approach. But whether you're a quantity surveyor or an architect or whatever you are, you still have to look at it from your perspective and where you fit in the design team. And you have to look at it, what are the project requirements? Have you appointed an information manager? And you do need to appoint an information manager because you do need to be able to control the information, the flow of information, get the right information. You also need to understand the establishment of conventions. And these would be, for example, naming documents, because even the quantity surveyor has a drop-down box with, he names the documents according to it's an estimate, a bill of quantities, a schedule, whatever. He names it, and there is a defined naming process. And you need to look at it from the point of view of separate project spaces. And again, the thing with implementing CDE is this continuous reviews. And this works on the basis of, which you'll see now in a minute, I might have, it works on the basis of, how do we work? Oh, yes, I move forward. It works on the basis of work in progress, shared, published documentation and archived. So going back, BIM is back to where I was, is, all right, where are we going to? Oh, here we are, yeah. When you're including, it's information that's ready available at any time, but when you're including BIM, you've got to understand that it is an iterative process and that we go from one milestone to another milestone. We go from one gate to another gate where things are published and where we can move on then to the next section and move on to the next section. So it's available to all members, including the documentation, all the data information, and any shortfalls or not, as the case may be, you will be able to pick them out. And if people are working off BIM, it gets us away from the situation where you have specifications which don't actually apply to the particular building, or you have back in the past when we did bad BIM, you'd have drawings that were not cut sections from the actual model itself. They were done later or done differently, so they didn't really reflect what's in the model. So if we do BIM according to information management according to 19650 and the common data environment, we will actually end up having sections and models and information that are only relevant to the specific project. So it gets away with a lot of duplications, and it gets away with a lot of areas that are missing. It gets away with a lot of problems. Is it this or is it that? You know, what is it? So following on from that, the project information is continually updated. It goes in as information, and the information is entered once and once only. And after that, it's a continual updating. Add more information as required, depending on the level of development, the level of information, level of need. So these are also other things you need to look at and understand, because you apply to all the consultants. So it is, and I say, following from completion of it, the information then should be easily and readily available to transfer into the CAFM system. So it's very important to get a very good CDE system that's interoperable with most CAFM systems or most facilities management systems, so that there is no loss of data and you can bring it from one right to the other without any loss of data. And at handover stage, the important thing is the information containers required for asset information management should be moved from the PIM to the AIM, which is again the asset information management. From the project information management to the asset information management. Now, how do BIM and CDE fit together? Well, the IM BIM is for information. At one stage, we used to say building information modeling. We no longer say that. Now it's building information management. But like I said, strictly speaking, we should say information management according to ISO 19650, because we may or may not have a model in it. And when we use the word BIM, people automatically think of models. Well, a number of people think of models. And BIM is undoubtedly a useful way to improve construction project delivery and should feed into a CDE to provide key stakeholders with digital representation of a building spanning the project life cycle. The great thing about a 3D representation is, for lay clients or for people who are interacting with a model who don't really understand construction or are not particularly spatial, BIM is a very good way of showing them what they're getting, when they're getting, how they're getting it. And they can decide very early on if it's fit for what they want or if it's really what they need, or they can change very early on, very, very, pre-design stage, and say, no, this is what I'm after. This is what I want to go, move forward with. So it saves a lot of iterations. It saves a lot of designs, and it saves a lot of rework. BIM working within a true CDE, because as I say, in the past, there was a number of people who thought they had CDEs, but they weren't actually CDEs in accordance with ISO 9650. It has neutrality and it has security as its core, and it enhances collaboration. Now, the stages of information, there are, again, as I said, when you're working through the common data environment, there are four stages of information. And in time, you'll become familiar with them. They're work in progress, which is, where the different design consultants will do their own work. Because remember, BIM, there can be numerous models. And I suppose the one good thing about in the past, when people used Revit, it was a very good model, and people could actually work in the native Revit model, because you'd have Revit architecture, Revit structure, Revit MEP. Like an example would have been on the Children's Hospital. They could actually work in the native models, but they would have to make an IFC model for all the other people, which would include us, unless we know how to go into a Revit model. And a lot of quantity surveyors these days do actually know how to interrogate a Revit model. And now we're talking about the common data environment and the QS. The QS needs to look at the scale of data and development, and the adoption of digital technologies continues to increase. And right out there at the moment, there's loads and loads and loads of software. But when you are getting software, the one thing you must make sure is that it is interoperable, and that it is fit for purpose, and that it matches the standards. You must engage in the process. Quantity surveyors in the past sat on the fence, understandably so, for a while, because, as I said, BIM for 5D QSs wasn't mandated in the UK. Here, we struggled on with a lot of bad BIM, and there was a lot of bad BIM, plus the fact there wasn't a great understanding of BIM, and plus the fact we didn't have digital skills to the same degree as we do now. But also, coming out of the universities now, we have a huge amount of digital natives. And I think anyone who has kids will understand, they are digital natives. They're pre-programmed for digitization. They don't think in terms of analog or paper. They don't even like paper or analog. And they are, the modern people these days, the modern graduates are very environmentally conscious and very socially aware. So this is why climate action is so important. So as I said, we now coming into the workforce, we will have a lot of digital enabled surveyors, because the colleges are teaching it, but also architects and other people as well. But the good thing about it at the moment is we have a severe shortage of quantity surveyors, as everyone probably knows at this stage. So we really do need to upskill the people we do have within our own in our own offices, in our own firms. It's so important to upskill them because they have the knowledge. But again, this is something that's happening organically, and it's happening gradually. And people, I think there's nobody at this stage who has no BIM awareness. Everybody has BIM awareness, and everybody's done some level to some degree. And it is great that the SESI are actually doing these, these BIM bites for the SMEs. So I suppose one of the things is you must participate in the development of the structure and the naming conventions and the workflows. The naming conventions for quantity surveyors are, of course, important for quantity surveyors. So you've got to understand what they're about and how they work. Once you get into them, they're quite simple, actually. You need to identify a project lead with responsibility for information management. It's all about information management, the flow of information management in, the flow of what the information you need to make sure that what you get is what you want and what you need in the format you want. You need to also identify to all stakeholders what information you require, when you require it, what format you require it, how you require it. The day before we take whatever we got is long gone. We even need to know like what versions of software we're using on, so we're all working off the same versions. And the thing about this is the problem with we're quantity surveyors, so design consultants do not always get into the minds of quantity surveyors. So we really need to know. We need to tell them in advance what we want, how we want it. So when they design it in the models, it'll spew it out to us when we go looking at the models. Well, as much as we can, because we won't get everything we were looking for, but because BIM models don't model everything we're looking for. But it's important at this stage to really get on board with it and really, because at the end of the day, if we haven't got what we want, it's down to ourselves. We need to have a clear understanding of our needs and ensure that they're reflected in the CDE, because there are milestones and there are, you know, published data, and we move on from one section to another section. And because the OGP, you know, they've done a lot of work on fees and fee structure, and they're going to do the fees according to the capital works management frameworks. In other words, you can be required to do certain things at certain times. And as you know, because architects do the design, a lot of the design now is done up front. So there's a higher level of money going out up front. So you could be asked to do different stages, and they will all be defined. The OGP are doing a lot of work on the fees, on how the requirements, what they require of each individual person in the different capital works management frameworks for each of the, if we go back to it, you'll see for each of the specific requirements. So you do need to know what you should know what stage you're at in the capital works management framework. And if you're a private quantity surveyor, you should still know, what stage you're at, what you need, how to get it. It's so important to how to get it. And as we know, everything these days is like on e-tenders, everything is digitalized. So it's very important to actually BIM up, ICMS up. So the good thing about the common data environments is they have good security measures in place. And the administrators will be the ones who will restrict access to those who require it, when and how. And basically, I think that's it. That's a whistle tour through the BIM, the ISO 19650, and of course the common data environment. So if there are any questions.
Thanks very much, Mary. I think we've a number of kind of comments in the chat. Just before I get to those, actually, I know you mentioned ICMS a few times. I just wanted to mention to people here today that there are some guidance notes on ICMS and mapping to the national standard building elements on the SCSI site, if you'd like to have a look at those. And we're going to SCSI will have some CPD and training coming for ICMS before the end of the year, and further training in the new year as well, just to help with bedding that in. If there's any questions, do please post them in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. I might kind of just use some of the comments to prompt a bit of discussion, Mary. I know, Ross, you made a number of comments there. One that was interesting was just around your experience in Denmark, that after 10-15 years BIM development, that even small projects are now using BIM because it's much more efficient and best practice. Do you see that coming down the tracks for us, Mary? How might that happen?
Oh, very much so. Very much so. I think we'll get into a situation where we'll be so used to the processes. We'll think we will think in terms of productivity and efficiency, because remember, we're an aging population with regards to surveyors, and there's very few of them out there, and they're very difficult to get. So we have to do more with less. But we're also finding if we digitalize, we can do more much faster, much quicker, and it gives us information. Plus, we need the great thing about the day, at the end of the day, when it all boils down to just data, and it's all about data management, it's all about getting, data analytics. That's really what it all boils down to at the end of the day. How can we do, that's where we're at. And by using BIM and using ICMS, we will be able to collect data that will be structured. You see, it's all standardized and structured. Remember, ICMS is a global standard, and it's connected with the IPMS and the ILMS. But the thing about the ICMS is it's everywhere. It's the UK, it's Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, everywhere, all over Europe. So I mean, and the World Bank is behind it. So there's a lot of really good reasons to use it. And the same with BIM. Like, one of the things I've learned is we're one of the last really out of the EEC countries to BIM up, but we're doing it very effectively and efficiently. And we're actually standing on the shoulders of giants who've gone before us. So we're in a really good place. We know an awful lot, and we've done an awful lot of work on the international stage. We've done a huge amount of work on the international stage. And we were BIMing up even before the mandate. But the thing about the mandate was we needed the mandate for everyone to come on board. And I honestly believe that in 10 years' time, everyone will be BIMing, but they won't even know it. It's just information management. They won't call it BIM. They won't even use the word BIM.
Just to comment on that, Mary, it's Ross here.
So the mandate does not require to have 3D models. It just requires the management of information. You mentioned that at the beginning.
Yes, the reason the OGP are a great lens to explain that, if you look at, I've given you the timeline, and you go less than 1 million, you go, well, why would I have a model on less than 1 million? But actually, it's not about the model at all. Strictly speaking, we shouldn't be talking about BIM. We should be talking about information management according to ISO 19650, which is the correct title.
Yeah.
And that is information management. That's, you look at drop-down menus, go, do I need that? Do I need that? No, 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 no. And you keep going and go. It's something that'll make you think about what you need and why you need it and when you need it. So it's really only information management when you get down to it. And we will do it, yeah. I firmly believe we'll do it.
So it's just an interesting point because at the center of any construction project is the 3D model, and it's the dimensions are the development of information around the 3D model. So the fifth dimension being cost is the quantum information that you pull from a design, and hopefully we get to a place where you're pulling the quantum from the 3D model, at least the majority, if you like, and then applying your pricing to that. So I would hope that at least the bigger projects, there's an absolute need for that, I would say.
Oh, no, there is. It's only when you talk about the small projects. I mean, if you talk about the small projects in you wouldn't usually do a villa quantities for less than 1 million anyway, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah,
so
100%.
really, at less than 1 million, they're so small you wouldn't. But I mean, people still when they're designing it, they actually design it in 3D.
Yeah.
So it's like it is still designed. If they're designing an extension, it's still designed in 3D. So we'll still be doing a level of it. And if you want to use the 3D, you can pull it out of it.
Yeah.
But it depends on whether people design it or not, if you know what I mean. But yeah, no, there will be models will be used. We'll be using not just models, we'll be using digital twins and things like that. Like
another comment from my side, so if no one else has one, was that the information manager, I think it's a very good point. When we work with architects and engineers as quantity surveyors, you will always have the BIM coordinator for the architect and the BIM coordinator for the engineer. As quantity surveyors, you need your BIM coordinator, or as Mary said, your information manager, but that does not have to be a specialist resource. That could just be your quantity surveyor who you have trained up to understand information management. And
Correct.
Ideally what they're doing is double tasking. They're doing traditional quantity surveying, as in advising and quantification from the models, but they're also managing the quality of information from your perspective as a QS practice. I think that's just important to understand. So you don't have to go out and start buying more resource. You just train what you have so that it becomes a natural day-to-day process for your team to work in information management.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I think we need to train up our people anyway. It's very important to keep them, to train them up. And who best to do it on a quantity surveyor anyway?
Yeah.
Yep. Or quantity surveyors, yep.
Yeah, just one other point I just wanted to get in there just before we finish up. Mary, you'd mentioned the skills shortage, which we're all very aware of, and I just can't resist the opportunity to get a plug in for our apprenticeship. So SCSI recently launched a new Level 9 Master's Apprenticeship in partnership with TUS Limerick that is now accepting applications from employers on apprentices. So if anyone would like information on that, get it on apprenticeships.ie or by contacting me at james@scsi.ie. So a shameless plug there, but I just thought it's worth getting it James.
in. I have one more comment actually, and it relates to information management and the softwares we use. Mary, you mentioned Revit, and when Revit was providing, or on projects where Revit was the main design platform, all disciplines were designing in Revit. I would always have the argument that as quantity surveyors, we shouldn't be altering any Revit files. We should be working with IFC only. It does mean two things. It means that we don't have to go out and procure Revit licenses, which are super expensive, because we don't technically get the value from it. So you can keep your costs down of digital transitioning by not getting Revit licenses and only using free Revit viewers, and then IFC as your main information communication language. But so I know there's some practices, and some of you guys on the call will have Revit licenses and be viewing models and altering information in Revit, but that's just the way we see the particular market, to be honest.
Well, I got to agree with you, Ross. You can't, as quantity surveyors, we can't alter the design. That's not our function. So we can't alter the design. But what a lot of quantity surveyors do is they go into the parameters and say, I want to, I want this, I want that, I want the other. It's information, or they go in and look at it. But a large number of practices do have Revit viewers because it's free. They actually do have them. But again, we cannot touch design. That's outside our remit. We can't change design.
That's an important comment there, because in the past we've had conversations where people were going, quantity surveyors were saying, look, I need to purchase licenses so I can put my coding in and I can get the right structure and so on in place. And we're saying that's the conversation you should be having with the design team.
Precisely, yes.
It's in accordance with the BIM execution plan. They should have responsibility for delivering the information in the pre-agreed quality levels, et cetera, et cetera. So let's maybe bear that in mind.
Yes.
And there's a comment there. Yeah, Revit schedules are a great way to pull quantities from the model. That's also true. Yeah, for door schedules and other types of schedules. Yeah, thanks, Jonathan.
But we need to know what we've got to ask for. We do need to know what we've got to ask for, and we need to understand the models. I think before we sat on the fence and, they did their thing, we did our thing. But we come to realize that if we don't help ourselves, nobody else is going to help ourselves.
Exactly.
So we have to have these awkward conversations with architects and quantity or with structural engineers and tell them, okay, we want this in this format. This is why we want it, how we want it, etc., etc. It puts them to a bit of trouble.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, if we don't ask for it, we won't get it.
As we mentioned before in previous presentations, like the quantity surveyor, in our opinion, it's the first stakeholder group in the design process that looks at a design, not from a design perspective, but from an information perspective. Up until that point, it's designers transferring information from a design purpose. So we're the gatekeeper of quality before it hits the market. Ideally speaking, if we can streamline this process using information management and the qualification of information, contractors won't need to be remodeling the models once they receive them, because the quality would be so good. That's what we're seeing in the international market, and that's what will come here also as we improve our understanding of the process and the communication between the stakeholders. Yeah.
Yep, I completely agree with that. Yes.
Well, I'll just conclude by saying thank you very much, Mary, for a fantastic presentation, and thank you, Ross, as well, for your comments. We are back on Monday at 2 with a presentation on file formats.
Yes.
So look forward to seeing you all then. If any questions do occur after the presentation today, or you want to follow up on any points raised, feel free to contact us at education@scsi.ie, and we can prep those for the presentation on Monday. So I'll just say thank you all again for attending, and have a great weekend. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye.
Cheers, everyone. Thanks, Mary. Bye-bye.